You guys know we've talked about Hellblade 2 a handful of times on Luke Stevens Live, and it's because I'm interested in it. I loved the 2017 original game. Very unique, very different. Had some problems, like the combat is a nothing burger, very repetitive. Basically turns into a walking simulator, but the ending sequence in that game, no spoilers, one of the most memorable I've had in a game in many, many a moon. I mean, very, very unique, very different. And I loved it. I mean, it's great. So I've been super stoked on this for a while. I've been hoping it's really good, but there's been a handful of weird things about it. The trailers are really, really weird. The devs will say stuff like, we've completely rebuilt the combat system, and then they refuse to elaborate, and all of the footage looks identical to the old combat system. They'll talk about how this game is about taking everything they did in the last game and trying to make it bigger and badder. But then we get confirmation that this game is about the same length as the original, about 7 to 8 hours. They've been working on it for 7 years. That means for each year that this has been in development, they've got 1 hour of content, which is wild. Now, if it is the case that this is just a super high production value, crazy cinematic experience with crazy set pieces and stuff, then okay, that's why it took a year per hour of content. I get it. But there's a couple of core things that people have been hoping for when it comes to Hellblade 2. And that is, for one, that the gameplay is kind of reworked a bit so that the combat is not so droning and repetitive. Also, that the puzzles are not so copy and pasted all over the place. Those are the main things. And, of course, people would love some broader scope as well. And IGN and some other people actually got to go and check it out, which is pretty cool. So there's a preview event that they've done here. Now, as part of this, just elephant in the room, because I see people in chat mentioning it, it is confirmed that they are targeting 30 FPS, 4K with a variable resolution on Series X. Okay, Series S, I would imagine it's like 1440p at 30, whatever. So some people are naturally like blowing up over this and they're like, oh, well, too bad, game's gonna suck now. I'm not, like, I don't buy that. I'm not willing to dismiss it like that. My stance has always been 30 FPS is fine for some genres of games. Specifically, like, I can't do 30 FPS in FPS games. So games like Doom playing at 30 would just be a vomit simulator. But for like a third person adventure game, it's really not a big deal. Like, I can play the like Red Dead Redemption 2 on console and be fine. Like, I don't need it running at super high frame rates. It's okay. We'll manage. Okay. I think the knee-jerk reaction to just like find reasons to throw fits and like cancel games is really, it's a sickness in the industry. I think, like, you can be frustrated by something. It doesn't mean that the game is therefore terrible. It's just not. And this is paired with a frustration that I've had with this console generation, which has been that it feels like there really has not been a significant leap forward technologically speaking. Like, it feels like games mostly have looked like last gen games. They mostly run pretty poorly, it seems, especially on the AAA scale. And I'm just like, what? It's been 4 years that we've been in this generation, and other than like faster load times, I haven't really seen that big of a leap forward. So people have been asking, like, okay, well, we'd rather either have one of the two. We'd like to have 60 FPS, or we'd like to have significantly improved fidelity. Hellblade 2, without a doubt, is pushing increased fidelity instead of the frame rate, which I think is the right choice. I think a game like Hellblade benefits more from looking prettier than it does higher frame rates. That's my experience with this franchise, with the last game. I don't think, the extra frames are that crucial on console. Then again, on PC, I'm sure you can crank it and get it running even faster, but still. All this to say, I think but it's 30 FPS in 2024. Get wrecked, bro. Like, I just think you can't leave out the other side of the equation. If it's 30 FPS and it looks like a PS4 game, absolutely reason to be very upset. If it's 30 FPS, but it's one of the best looking games that's ever released, okay, fair enough. You earned that 30 FPS. In the same way, like, a lot of people are going to shut up when it comes to GTA 6, even though that's going to run at 30 frames everybody's going to shut up the second that happens. People are going to throw a fit over it, but still. Let's see, though, what this is actually like, what IGN thought about it. All this to say, I don't think the FPS drama is that big of a deal. I'm not that worried about it. I don't think it's a reason for boycott or cancellation. Let's see what the game is actually like, because again, if it looks really pretty but still sucks to play, doesn't matter. None of this really matters.
Senua, would you give your life for these outsiders?
In my darkest hour, it was an outsider who saved me.
As I slowly worked my way through an Icelandic settlement freshly ravaged by rampaging Northmen, I found myself flanked by bubbling volcanic pools and a pile of mangled corpses left to rot by their creators. Ahead, along a bloodied path stretching into the distance, dread-fueled bellows soundtracked an ominous pulsating glow. It was a nightmare scenario, but one that only made me want to delve deeper into what further terrors await me in Senua's saga Hellblade 2.
It's terrifying. So beautiful.
Following the traumatic events of the first game, Senua is now on a journey to Iceland to hunt down the Vikings who destroyed her home. But not all is as it seems on the Scandinavian island, as otherworldly creatures like Draugr and giants roam its shores. I spent a good portion of my playtime listening to the death echoes of a recently pillaged village and learning about what had happened there, before moving inland to be welcomed by a frightening ritual scene delivered from hell. Here, I met a mysterious man said to be the ritual's next sacrifice, before Senua intervened in an attempt to rescue him. He clearly has a connection to Senua's past, but the rest remains unknown. Much of the story of Hellblade 2 is still shrouded in mystery to me, despite having played nearly an hour of it. This sort of story-first ethos in a high production value package is one you'd more typically expect from a PlayStation Studios game. Not only in Hellblade's aesthetic and setting similarities with Sony Santa Monica's God of War, but also in the way it approaches its more mature subjects of family trauma and mental health issues. As those familiar with the original will know though, Hellblade 2 plays much differently from God of War, instead opting to emphasize even further its priority of narrative ambitions over action. Speaking of action, this is a game of exploration and extermination, and that brings us to combat.
I mean, I will say at the outset, just based off of all of that, this is all footage we've seen before, so it's not anything that shocking or new. But as for what has been said, I mean, it is a cinematic game first and foremost. And he's right. This is something you would typically expect from Sony. And that's why like exclusives like this for Xbox, I think are actually really a smart move. I mean, if you're trying to pull people over to either PC or play this game through xCloud, or dare I say even buy an Xbox if they should dare, this is a great way to do it. If this ends up actually living up to the hype and it ends up being pretty good. Whether it does or not is still up in the air. I think the biggest thing that could hold it back is if, you know, we've waited 7 years and the game feels like a marginal improvement, except graphically it's a leap. But if everything else is like barely altered from the original, that could come back to bite them, I think, for sure. I'm not understanding how the combat works. Is it a cinematic timing, almost like a quick time event? No, so like there's he'll discuss it here in a second, but the original game, it was like a series of, you know, attacks within certain windows, like your standard melee attack for a game, and then it's based around parries and then dodging and moving around the arena. But it's very, very simple. I mean, it's like your standard slash parry slash dodge slash parry. Like, it's really not a lot. Beyond that, in the original game, there were a ton of like these visual puzzles where it's like you have to line up these two things to create a symbol, and that unlocks the next door that you can walk through. The first 10 times you do it, it was super cool, but there were like extended gameplay sequences where you just do 5 of these in a row, and it started to get a little bit samey. So we'll see if they discuss that, if that's been reworked or anything, but we'll see.
And that brings us to combat. Encounters may seem familiar at first. They still take place in walled-off arenas and demand every enemy be defeated before progressing on. But there are tangible differences to be found as well. Each swing of the sword comes with a heavier weight to it, emphasizing the damage every plunge into a foe's flesh causes. Dodging and parrying remain key components, just as reading the rhythm of your opponent's attacks stays vital to your survival. These tells are something you'll need to keep an extra keen eye on too, as the parry window for Senua to meet steel with steel appears far less forgiving this time around. The improvements to combat were best displayed in an intense battle that occurred right at the end of the playable sequence. A procession of around a dozen enemies faced off against me with no respite allowed.
That was a thing in the original game too, is that there would just be like a flood, and so you'd just be like fighting waves and waves and waves of enemies time and time and time again. Got a little old at times. Sean Pog, thank you, my friend. 5 gifteds on YouTube. Welcome Norcat, Brian, Bowser, Kieran, and Dean. Welcome. Yeah, it's been a frustration. It's been a big frustration, and it seems like the same thing is happening here. It could still be good, but I'm hearing that there's more of the same. I mean, that's my takeaway so far, is that it's tightened up and parry timings are tighter and the animation sets are much bigger. But beyond that, I'm like, it seems like it's the same thing, you know?
Battle demonstrated the increased variety of enemy types, with new foes emerging from the shadows to replace their fallen allies. They delivered both quick ranged attacks and heavy close-up blows that put my admittedly rusty skills to the test. All of this occurred while all hell seemingly broke loose around me, as innocent victims meant swift and vicious demises, while fire, flames, and all manner of horror filled each corner of the screen. It was thoroughly exciting and felt like an improvement over the original's rigid by comparison combat. It's not reinventing the wheel here, but turns things up a few notches, adding a desperate edge to each encounter. Combat director...
I'm glad it's refined, but I mean, again, people were pretty frustrated by the original's combat. And like the biggest thing with Hellblade, I think the best way you could describe it is like with The Last of Us Part 2. You know, The Last of Us Part 2, you play it, and if you've never played it yourself, the best way I can describe it is that it is emotionally draining. You know, it's not that like you play a game like Elden Ring maybe and you get stuck on a boss and it's like, it's draining because you're just trying so many different things. You're like, okay, maybe this time I can do it. If I get this parry, if I do this, it'll work out. Like that's just a matter of like resolve. In the case of The Last of Us Part 2, it's just there's so much trauma and drama and misery, all just non-stop. There's no levity, there's no jokes, there's no lightheartedness, there's no calm moments walking through a meadow. Hellblade was like that. Like in the entire game, I can think of like one sequence where you're like walking through flowers towards a tree, and that is a hallucination that goes away almost instantly. So like there's no settlement, like it's all just misery. And in the case of like Hellblade, it worked because it was short enough. The Last of Us Part 2, it's just like by the time that game's over, you're like, thank God, I just need to go sleep and cry. But yeah, I like The Last of Us Part 2 as well. I'm just saying, when that game was over, I was like, I need to go take a shower and like hug my family, and I just got to chill out. And in Hellblade 2, or Hellblade the original game, it was just also a trudge. I mean, especially with how immersive the audio was and the constant like hallucinations and the topic of mental illness and all of that, it's just very tough to like one shot in a single evening or afternoon or something. And in this case, I mean, I would imagine something similar is going to happen. So the game's emotionally draining? Yes. Yeah. Very, very much so. So I would imagine this game is similar. This game is probably also a bit emotionally draining. And it sounds like combat is built in a similar way where it's just an onslaught of constant interactions. So it seems like there's probably not going to be a lot of downtime, which is good if it's only like 7 hours long, but it's also, you know, buckle up.
Benoit Macon cites Game of Thrones' Battle of the Bastards as an inspiration, in which an outnumbered Jon Snow takes on enemies one by one amid a frantic battle. The variety of swings, blocks and parries executed within the minute-long scene were the key takeaways, and resulted in Ninja Theory making every fight a one-on-one duel. Action can happen around Senua, but there's never more than one enemy attacking her at any time. Instead of increasing the scale of fights, there is a far greater increase in the number of different combat animations. I saw many varied brutal sword swings and flesh-slicing finishes over just a handful of encounters, each performed with believable weight and purpose. This combat approach, along with the environment, story and visual design, immerses the player further into Senua's struggle. Unsurprisingly for a studio this focus on the cinematic, performance capture has been used for each and every battle maneuver, resulting in what feels like a real step up when compared to the first game. Nothing illustrates this quite like the fact that it took around 70 hours to record all of Hellblade 2's combat moves, in a large purpose-built motion capture stage at Ninja Theory's studio. The original Hellblade's combat performance capture, on the other hand, was recorded in just 2 days in a small boardroom, where
That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, all of this also kind of reminds me of like BioShock Infinite, when you have a perfectionist at the helm who doesn't want to settle for anything and like keeps going bigger and bigger and bigger, even though it probably doesn't matter that much. Like, I don't know how much it matters to have that much, animation reference versus half of that. We're going to find out. We'll see. But I'm starting to get the vibe that they spent a lot of time doing things that maybe are not going to be that noticeable to most people. But we'll talk about the game's director right after this, because there was an interesting development with that. So we'll get there.
If it was swung too high, it would hit the ceiling. The extra time taken and effort put in really shows, with fights seamlessly flowing as each enemy is dispatched in a different manner from the one before it. Outside of combat, puzzles will also be largely familiar to any who played Senua's Sacrifice.
It's happening again. It's him. There. He is dying again.
As I tried to leave the battle-torn village, I was met with a swirling vortex of bones and limbs, emitting an unwelcoming red light. In order to remove this barrier, I'd need to find 3 runic shapes in the world, which...
Oh man, this is like exactly what it was in the original game, where it's like, I remember this post, you have to line up this post with this to make a rune with something else you see in the environment. And there's a lot of stuff like that where you just reach a door and it's very arbitrary. It's like, okay, line up here, do this 3 times, and then you can get through. And it's like, because the rest of the game is so cinematic and so grounded. And then it's like, okay, stop, look for symbols. And it's cool because it makes you appreciate the environment much more, and they did a lot of work and detail and everything with it. So you're looking at every little thing, trying to line things up, and it's an interesting way to exercise that mental part of your brain that you might not use a lot. But it's something that I would have thought would be like for achievements or for maybe cool upgrades or something that are optional, to make it the primary means of progression to get through doors and locks and stuff just brings the game to a crawl. And that was a thing that was definitely present in the original.
Required a reasonable level of exploration and lateral thinking. They were by no means overly challenging, but something I couldn't help but feel I'd done a few too many times already in the original. I hope these challenges develop in complexity as the adventure moves on. It's an adventure whose cinematic aspirations can be felt in every frame, in part thanks to an anamorphic cinema lens attached to the in-game camera. From this viewpoint, shades of the psychological dances with death, along rugged Scandinavian coastlines in Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, and the bold flashes of otherworldly colour synonymous with Dario Argento movies can be observed. But by far the most tangible touchstone is the films of Robert Eggers. Hellblade infuses the mythic Norse setting of the Northmen with the murmuring dread that serves as the undercurrent to the Witcher's folk horror. It's not all horror in this world though, with plenty of room left for wonder too. An example of this is a new type of puzzle that emerges in these lands more organically. A rock may appear as a face when viewed from a certain angle, which can then be focused on to reveal a new path. At the end of this path sits a tree that rewards you with extra story details. This sort of
That's super trippy. Oh my god. Look at that again. Okay, so the rock looks like a face. It's going to flash and a new walkway will appear in it. That's pretty crazy.
Appear as a face when viewed from a certain angle, which can then be focused on to reveal a new path. At the end of this path sits a tree that rewards you with extra story details. This sort of trick of the eye environmental puzzle only helps you embed yourself into the world as seen through Senua, and step into her mind even further. Talking of Senua's mind, we can't not touch on Melina Jurgen's impressive performance as the protagonist.
There's something here. They are not. I need to find out what it is.
In many ways, it is key to the immersion, demonstrated in how the camera finds every opportunity to close in on her. It's all a credit to the top-tier performance capture technology and Jurgen's wildly expressive eyes and subtle facial twitches. That face regularly looks set to burst with fear, something the psychosis-induced voices of the Furies residing in her head only add to. Perpetually chattering voices can be annoying in games, and if done poorly here could easily result in a laughable imitation of the many shades of Smeagol. But it's to its credit that Hellblade's accompanying whispers and screams never irritate, instead assisting in combat and drip-feeding background intrigue. It's top-tier sound design that, much like in the first game, really comes to life when played with headphones, allowing for the binaural audio recordings to surround your head like it's in the centre of a whirlpool.
This is our quest. This is our destiny. Our mission.
All of this focus on presentation and story does run the risk of Senua's Saga's gameplay not always being the focus, and ultimately feeling a little one-note. This is certainly a criticism that can be fairly levelled at its predecessor, and from the 45 minutes I've played of Hellblade 2, it's not initially apparent that things have moved on a great deal since then. Puzzles and combat definitely feel more refined than reinvented, capturing a similar cadence to that felt in 2017, albeit with interesting new wrinkles. But that familiarity never diminished what makes both the original Hellblade and this new chapter so good though. Its ambitious narrative and accomplished cinematic framing far outweigh whatever shortcomings may be hidden underneath, and the incredible technology powering its beautifully ugly world is a sight to behold. It's all shaping up to be another riveting, haunting, and uncompromisingly immersive nightmare of both Senua's and Ninja Theory's creation, and one I can't wait to both enter and escape later this year. For more on Hellblade 2 and
So, all of that to say, I'm left kind of where I was before. You know, I was hopeful that seeing this or hearing this would be like, okay, and all of those concerns you had about combat, about puzzles, about this or that, don't worry about them. Totally reworked. They've spent the last 7 years really, really reinventing this. Doesn't really seem like that's the case. It seems like they're doing more of what they did before, which wasn't bad, but it had a lot of issues that prevented it from being amazing, amazing. It prevented it from getting quite there. So I mentioned that one of the things this reminded me of, with like the fact it's taken 7 years, a year per hour of content, the weird focus and doubling down of doubling down on this like perfectionistic style of development. It reminded me of BioShock Infinite, and that is a story, of Ken Levine, and a prolific game designer in his own right, who's of course currently working on Judas, which is another big game we've been talking about. But he is also perfectionist, very eccentric. He loves to think through every step of the game's design. He knows what he's doing, but he never knows where to settle. He always will just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, right? And it can get him into trouble sometimes. Thank you, Raymond Sub, for gifting a sub on Twitch. Appreciate you. So with this, an interesting little tidbit hit as part of these previews dropping, which was really interesting. And that is that while the reviews are overall pretty positive, there seems to be a bit of a surprise, which is that Tamim Antoniadis, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but he has left the studio. He's no longer there. The previews broke almost at the same time another Ninja Theory story emerged, that the studio's high-profile co-founder and creative director, Tamim Antoniadis, has left the studio, where he's been with the team since 2004 through Heavenly Sword, Enslaved, Devil May Cry, and the first Hellblade. It's not exactly clear what happened here. While it may make sense for a figure like Antoniadis to leave after 20 years and the conclusion of a major project, his departure was never announced, and only when Polygon noticed he was not at the preview event did Ninja Theory confirm he had left. No reason was given by either Ninja Theory or Antoniadis himself. He did indeed work on Hellblade 2, so you might imagine he would at least stay through the launch to help promote it, but he's gone. And it's unknown exactly when this happened or why. Perhaps more details will emerge later. I've asked Microsoft to comment, and we'll update when I hear back. From Microsoft, they sent this. They said, quote, Tamim was involved in the early stages of development on Hellblade. Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2. And after a period of transition to the Senua's Saga leadership team, he has moved on from being an employee of Ninja Theory. It's interesting, right? It's interesting. Now, it sounds like he sold the studio for a lot. I saw one person say they sold it for like 140 million or something. Let me pull this up. Oh, it was Jez Corden. Yeah, because somebody tweeted this out. So the director has left. They confirmed he's no longer there. The game now has a trio of creative leads: environment art director Dan Atwell, visual effects director Mark Slater Tunstill, and audio director David Garcia are now like the three heads of the game running it. And Jez said, if you sold your company for 120 million, I stand corrected, 120 million, you'd probably not stick around either. If I developed like and built a studio that was super successful and was creating really compelling art and that I was really proud of, I would sell the company and still work there. I'd be happy to do it. If he left, it's probably because the new owners maybe were okay with him leaving, or the other thing could be creative differences. It could be maybe health issues that made him step away. It could be like there could be any number of reasons for him to leave, but it is odd for a studio director and head honcho to leave before the conclusion of the project. It's just not it's not super common, and we've seen it happen with other games where things don't turn out super great, such as when Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker left Rocksteady before the release of Suicide Squad. We called that out because we were like, that's a little weird that they're leaving before it's done. That's a little odd. And that game ended up having plenty of problems. Maybe they just left because it just was a coincidence. Maybe they left because they knew that the house was burning down and they didn't want to stay inside. Who knows? But there just seemed to be a lot of strange things. Yeah, some people are describing, it looks like he has been gone for a while now and has only been involved in the early stages of development with Hellblade 2, so it shouldn't affect the game that much. This is common in the industry, though. They've gone through years of stress running the company, get purchased, make money, leave. They feel creatively dead because they've given everything up for ages. Like I said, there could be any number of reasons for him to leave. It could be that he did just get a $120 million bag. I don't know if he was the sole owner or what, but if he got millions and millions and he did want to just go party in Cape Town with a bunch of girls, more power to him, like whatever. They said that he's no longer an employee, so he could still be like on the board. He could still be involved with it, just not as like an actual employee of the team. Though I think if he were involved, he still would be at preview events and he still would be somewhat present. But it could be that he just got a bag and he wanted to bail. Who knows? It could be that. We're going to point it out because it was odd enough for IGN to see it that they wanted to call it out. They thought it was strange that he wasn't at the preview events because he previously was very active. I mean, if you remember back the marketing campaign of the original game, he was everywhere. All the dev diaries, all of the interviews, super, super involved. And so for him to not be involved at all was very weird, and it stood out to the IGN guys, which is why they asked, and they're like, oh yeah, he's not an employee. He's not working on it. And they just never talked about it, which I think is what's stranger, because typically, like we saw with the Rocksteady thing, when founders or the head honchos leave, because previously he was like the creative director. I mean, imagine if Cory Barlog or Neil Druckmann just stopped working at Naughty Dog. And they're just like, wait, why wasn't Neil Druckmann at the preview event for The Last of Us Part 3? Oh, we forgot to tell you. Yeah, he doesn't work here anymore. You'd be like, what? And you guys didn't publicize that? Like, what? It's just a little odd. So could be a nothing burger. The game still looks like the game looks like. I mean, I don't think anything, I don't think this changes anything. I don't think this alters anything, especially because it seems like he's probably been out for a while. But it does make me just wonder why he was, he bailed. Bro has 120 million. He can leave and create a new studio. I mean, from his Instagram, it looks like he's just traveling and partying, which more power to him. If he's got 120 million, wants to go buy a yacht, go to Cape Town, do whatever, live the pirate life, go for it, dude. Go for it. So all of this to say, I think Hellblade 2 while it still looks graphically very impressive, and I'm sure it'll be good, the things I've been looking for and hoping for that would make it fantastic or amazing, such as, you know, completely reworked puzzles, exploration, combat, stuff like that, that all seems to be iteratively improved. It seems to maybe, as they described it in the IGN video, they've taken some knobs, turned them up a few cranks, but it's not reinvented. Nothing's been like totally reworked. And that concerns me just because in the preview, or rather the interviews that they did like maybe 6 months ago for like the dev update thing that Xbox did, they said that they had completely reworked the combat system and completely redone all this. And it sounds like they've just basically removed it from multiple combat encounters to now it's focused on one, and it's a little tighter, a little more intense, not like totally reinvented or anything. So I would guess that it probably appeals to the same people that love the original one. I don't think it's going to probably blow the world up or anything. It's probably one of those like high 8s, low 9s type of games, which is still very, very, very good. That's, you know, even amazing by some metrics. But I think it will be held back from its full potential just because it seems like they're leaning back into some of the same things they've done for ages. He took my thing.